Welcome back, everyone, to Occult Archives. We are diving back into history's most feared books to unearth the mysteries, myths, and legends that surround them.
These are the books that people whisper about, the ones that are said to hold secrets too dangerous for the uninitiated.
You know those books that people say you shouldn't read out loud?
Exactly. And today, we're going to crack open one of these books. We are going to explore episode 134, Shadows of the Sacred.
We are taking a deep dive into the origins of demons, devils, and dark beliefs.
These are names, images that send a shiver down your spine.
But have you ever wondered, where did these figures of darkness actually come from?
What is their history?
Well, lucky for you, we have been doing some digging. We've gathered some really interesting historical perspectives, and for this episode, we are drawing particularly from demonology and devil-lore. We're going to try to understand how the concept of evil and these malevolent entities evolve throughout time.
Right, it's not a theological debate.
No, we're not getting into, do they exist, don't they exist? We're really going for like a historical anthropological.
Exactly. We're going to be explorers of the history of the concept of evil.
And what's really fascinating is that as I was digging into some of this material,
Yeah.
it's not like people just came up with these scary beings.
No.
It really sprang out of their own fears and anxieties.
That's right. It's about understanding how early humans tried to make sense of the world.
Right.
And for them, that world was full of very real dangers. So we're going to trace how the very idea of demons and devils took shape across different cultures, different historical periods.
And I mean, think about it. We're talking about a time when the world must have felt so much more unpredictable. You've got these powerful natural forces. You've got disease and hunger and a constant struggle for survival.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that people look for explanations, and often those explanations involved, unseen forces, spirits, demons.
Absolutely. And that's what's so fascinating about demonology and devil-lore. It's a journey into how these very human fears and anxieties about the unknown transformed into some of the most enduring and, let's face it, terrifying figures in human history. It's almost like we're trying to map the human imagination's response to fear and uncertainty.
Exactly. It's like, imagine how a simple stomach ache could feel like, oh no, is there a demon inside me?
Right. Is it a spirit? Is it something malevolent?
Or a violent storm.
Exactly. Or a drought, or a sudden illness. These weren't just inconveniences for early humans. They were matters of life and death.
Right, absolutely. So let's start with a fundamental shift in how our ancestors saw the world.
This is a key point. Early humans tended to see the sacred or the divine as something intertwined with nature itself, not something separate up in the heavens, but all around them. We call this pantheism.
So instead of looking up at the sky and saying, okay, there's God up there, they'd see the divine in the trees, the rivers.
Exactly. Everything was imbued with a kind of spiritual presence. The sun wasn't just a ball of fire, it was a god.
So for them, the sun wasn't just a giant ball of fire, it was a chariot pulled by like a radiant deity.
And those ancient trees weren't just wood and leaves, they were whispering with spirits. And every spring, bubbling up from the earth was the dwelling place of a nymph.
I love how demonology and devil-lore describes this era. It says the forces of nature were holding their carnival in these gay costumes. But then, as our understanding of the world developed, science struck the hour for unmasking, as the book puts it.
And as science provided more rational explanations, people began to understand these phenomena in different ways. And some of these divine personifications, they were, in a sense, demoted.
Okay, so it's not like they just vanished, right?
No, not at all. They evolved. They often transformed into something else. They became the subjects for studying, human psychology.
Our fears.
Exactly, our fears. Our anxieties. And sometimes what's really interesting is that some of these divine figures, they didn't just fade away. They went through a kind of spiritual downgrade. Their images and their names got twisted. They became darker.
They became demons?
They became the demons we know today.
It's amazing how the meaning of words can shift over time.
Right.
And demonology and devil-lore really dives into this.
It does. It really points out these linguistic connections.
And there are so many fascinating examples, like the word deity itself.
You wouldn't think it, would you? But it actually shares roots with words like deus, which could come from the Almorican word tois, and that meant a phantom.
Or even the word devil, which was actually, believe it or not, the gypsy name for God.
Not to mention the Persian word div, which originally could refer to a deity, but eventually it came to mean a malevolent demon. It's a fascinating journey for a word, isn't it? From the highest power to something feared and reviled.
It's like the word itself went through a fall from grace. And then there's bogey. It's a word we use all the time for it, like the monster under the bed.
But did you know it actually comes from the Slavonic word for God, bog? It's incredible, isn't it? The very word for the supreme being becoming a term for something that frightens children.
That is wild. What a journey for a word, huh? From supreme being to, like, the boogeyman.
It's a great example of how cultural context can completely change the meaning of a word.
It makes you think about all those scary words we use today. Like, what if they once meant something completely different?
What if they were once names for gods or spirits? It really makes you think about how our perceptions change over time.
And it gets even more complicated when you start looking at specific names, and not just the general words for deities or demons.
Right.
Like Siva.
Right, the Hindu god of destruction. But his name actually means auspicious, and he's often associated with positive qualities like creation and renewal.
So not all demons were always seen as purely evil.
Exactly. Many of these figures have much more complex origins and meanings than we might assume.
Like Lucifer.
Yes, the light bearer. He's a classic example. A figure associated with light, but later transformed into the embodiment of evil in Christian tradition. And Loki, too.
The Norse trickster god. You wouldn't think his name had anything to do with light, but it's actually related to the German word leucht, which means to shine.
It's almost as if these figures had their brightness twisted, inverted, to become something dark and dangerous.
And then there's Azazel.
Ah, yes. Often portrayed as just a scapegoat figure in the Bible, but, our text suggests that he might have originally been a deity. The name itself could mean the strength of God. And there's this tradition in some early rabbinic texts of considering these archdemons, like Azazel, as representations of divine energy.
Like forces that were powerful but could be used for both good and evil.
Exactly. Powerful forces that needed to be acknowledged and respected.
Okay, so we've got this really interesting shift happening, this move away from pantheism, this dawn of dualism, as the book calls it, and how that set the stage for the emergence of these demonic figures. But let's get into some specific types of demons now. And I think starting with a really basic primal fear is a good place to begin.
I agree.
Hunger.
Yes, hunger. I mean, imagine a world where finding food was a daily struggle.
I mean, that's got to create some serious anxiety.
For sure. And so it's not surprising at all that the need for food, this very basic human drive, led to the creation of these hunger demons, these figures who embodied the fear of starvation, the fear that there wouldn't be enough to go around.
I mean, think about it. When you're constantly worried about where your next meal is coming from, that anxiety can take some pretty dark forms.
It absolutely can. And you see that reflected in some of the really vivid descriptions in Demonology and Devil-Lore. The examples are, well, they're quite something.
Like the Karens of Africa. Their representation of the devil, it's Kephin.
And Kephin is.
A huge stomach floating through the air.
Just imagine that.
This massive disembodied stomach just drifting around. It's like a grotesque symbol of insatiable hunger.
It really speaks to that primal fear of scarcity.
Right, like there's never going to be enough.
Yeah.
And something is always going to be trying to take it from us. And then there's Miru.
Oh yes, Miru, the terrifying mistress of the invisible world for the South Sea Islanders. She's got this whole elaborate setup.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Souls are lured to a giant flowering tree that then descends into the underworld.
And then what happens?
They're captured in Miru's net.
Like fish.
Exactly. They're trapped, they're wriggling, they're exhausted. And then they have to face Miru.
And she is.
The very personification of ugliness, a horrifying figure that really captures that fear of being consumed.
Not just physically consumed by starvation.
Right, but also spiritually consumed by some overwhelming, monstrous entity.
It's like being devoured by the fear itself.
Yeah.
And then there's the Hindu myth of Rahu. Now, this is another really interesting one because it connects to something that we can actually observe in the natural world. Eclipses.
Yes. So Rahu is this demon head who's constantly trying to devour the sun and the moon.
And that is what causes eclipses.
That's the ancient explanation. It's a really powerful image, isn't it? The light being swallowed up by darkness.
And what's really fascinating is that this myth still influences how people in India behave during eclipses.
They make a lot of noise, banging pots and pans, shouting.
To scare Rahu away. I mean, how cool is that? This ancient myth is still very much alive.
It shows how these ancient explanations for natural events, for things that people couldn't understand, they really resonated. They spoke to deep fears. And those fears, they've lingered.
And then there's that really poignant example from England, the Pell Sol mine disaster.
Yeah.
The women refused to eat because they believed that their fasting could somehow save their husbands trapped in the mine.
That's right. They believed that the earth was a monster, a hungry monster, and if they didn't feed it, it wouldn't swallow their husbands.
It's so heartbreaking, but it also shows just how real, how visceral this fear of being consumed was.
It was a fear that ran deep, a fear that was embedded in their understanding of the world. So we've got these hunger demons, these figures who embody this primal fear of scarcity, of being devoured. But hunger wasn't the only elemental force that got demonized. There were others.
Hunger was just one way nature could be terrifying.
Exactly. There were other destructive forces out there, and they too found their personifications as demons.
Like fire.
Yes, fire, a force that could be both life-giving and incredibly destructive.
It could warm you, cook your food.
But it could also burn your house down.
And Demonology and Devil-Lore really highlights the close relationship between hunger demons and fire demons. They even give an example from Hindu myth, Agni.
Right. Agni is the god of fire, and he's often depicted as devouring his parents.
So fire is consuming the very things that gave birth to it.
That's the idea. It's an image of a force that's both creative and destructive.
It's that cycle of creation and destruction that we see throughout nature. And it's not just fire.
No, it's not just fire. There were other elemental demons.
Like,
Think about lightning. It's sudden, it's violent, it can kill.
and there are demons associated with that.
Absolutely.
And then there's fever.
Yes, fever. It's like an internal fire that consumes a person from within.
So anything that could be perceived as a threat, as something uncontrollable, it could be personified as a demon.
Exactly. It's about trying to make sense of these forces, to understand them, and perhaps even to control them.
And how did they try to control them?
Well, in many cultures, people would try to appease these demons. They'd make offerings, they'd perform rituals.
And was that just out of fear?
Not necessarily. It was also a way of acknowledging the power of these forces, of trying to establish some kind of relationship with them.
So it was like a way of saying, okay, we recognize your power, we respect your power, please don't hurt us.
Exactly. It's a very pragmatic approach, in a way, recognizing the potential for harm and trying to mitigate it.
I love the example from southern India. People would make offerings to both evil spirits and good spirits to try to find a balance.
Right. They would make offerings to the evil spirits, hoping to appease them. But they would also make offerings to good guardian spirits who they believed would protect them. It's like a spiritual balancing act.
There's like hedging your bets.
Exactly. You don't want to anger the bad spirits, but you also want to make sure you've got the good spirits on your side.
And then there are vampires.
Ah, yes. The vampires, the blood-drinking creatures of the night. They're another fascinating example of this idea of a human being transformed into a monstrous parasitic entity.
And the Slavic vampire beliefs are particularly detailed. Like they had all these rituals and methods for dealing with them.
Absolutely. If they suspected someone was a vampire, they would dig up at the grave and they would stake the body with a single blow through the heart.
That's pretty intense.
They believed that this would prevent the vampire from rising again.
It's a really visceral image, isn't it? The fear of being drained, consumed. And it's not just physical consumption.
Right. There are also stories about heart devourers. Creatures who steal hearts, not just for sustenance, but for some more sinister purpose. It's like a theft of something essential, of the very core of a person.
So we've got these hunger demons, we've got vampires, we've got all these elemental demons. But fire, as you mentioned, it's got this really interesting duality to it. It can be both life-giving and destructive. And that duality seems to be reflected in the fire demons of the ancient world, too.
Absolutely. Fire was essential for early humans, for warmth, for cooking, for protection, but it was also a force to be reckoned with.
And demonology and devil-lore really delves into this.
It does. They talk about Moloch and Baal, these ancient deities who were associated with fire.
And they were also associated with child sacrifice.
Unfortunately, yes. It's something that's very difficult for us to understand today, but it was a practice in some ancient cultures.
And what was the purpose of that?
Well, the book suggests that it was seen as a way of offering the most precious thing to the god. It was a way of ensuring his benevolence, of asking for his protection, and also of trying to appease his destructive side.
It really speaks to the power these deities held in people's minds.
Absolutely. And it shows how far people were willing to go to appease these forces.
But it wasn't just in ancient times that people feared fire.
No, not at all. The book mentions how fire-related superstitions and rituals persisted even in more recent times.
Like they talk about voodooism in Virginia.
Right, and the Chinese fire god with the white beard, it's like even as our understanding of the world became more scientific, that fear of fire, of its unpredictable power, it remained. It's almost as if fire has this primal hold on our imaginations.
Okay, so from fire, let's move to the opposite extreme. Winter.
Ah, yes, winter. The cold, the darkness, the scarcity of food.
It must have felt like a very real threat to survival, especially in
Mhm.
certain parts of the world.
Absolutely. And in those places, winter was often personified as a demon, a malevolent force that brought death and suffering.
And the text gives us a really good example of this. The Norse myth of Baldur's death.
Right. Baldur is the god of light and joy, and he's killed by his blind brother, Hodur, who represents darkness.
And who guides Hodur?
Loki, the trickster god, and it's all orchestrated by the forces of winter. The weapon is a mistletoe arrow, and Baldur descends to Hell, the realm of the dead.
It's a really powerful allegory for the triumph of winter over life and light.
It is, and it's just one example of how people personified winter as a demonic force.
But it wasn't just about passively accepting winter's power.
No, not at all. People actively resisted winter. They fought back with rituals and celebrations.
Right.
Think about the carnival rites in Slavic countries, the burning of winter effigies. These were all ways of symbolically defeating winter, of driving it away.
And there's the Clavey ceremony in Scotland.
Right. They would burn a tar barrel and carry it through the town, symbolizing the return of light and warmth.
It's all about celebrating the victory of life over death, of light over darkness.
Exactly.
Okay, so from the depths of winter, let's turn our attention to the skies. The winds, the storms, the unpredictable forces of the air.
Those were certainly powerful forces, and they too found their personifications as demons.
Like the Finnish demon, Hisi.
Right. He's depicted as riding through the air on a pale horse, spreading disease and death. It's a really vivid image of a destructive, chaotic force. And then there's Indra.
The Hindu god of rain.
Right. He was worshipped for bringing the life-giving monsoon rains, but he was also a warrior god, and his thunderbolt was a powerful weapon.
So he could also be destructive.
Absolutely. He wasn't just a benevolent rainbringer, he was a force to be reckoned with. And then you've got whirlwind demons and all those stories about people being caught up in whirlwinds and either disappearing or being returned, transformed. It's like the wind itself was seen as a powerful, unpredictable entity.
It's like that force that could carry you away to another realm.
Exactly.
And then there's water.
Oh, yes. Water. The source of life, but also a force of incredible destructive power.
Floods, storms, drownings.
And of course, the creatures that lurk beneath the surface. So it's not surprising that water was also personified as a demon.
And Demonology and Devil-Lore gives us some fascinating examples of water deities and demons.
It does. Like the Syrian deities, Dagon and Atargatis, they were both associated with fish and the sea.
And they're thought to be the ancestors of later water spirits like the Undines.
Right. Those beautiful but dangerous creatures who lured sailors to their deaths.
And then there's the German Nixie.
Yes, a mischievous water spirit. And some people believe that he's actually the origin of the name Old Nick for the devil.
It's so interesting how these figures from different cultures, different mythologies, they can sometimes be connected in unexpected ways.
Absolutely. It really highlights how these beliefs traveled and evolved over time and how certain themes and anxieties like the fear of water, they resonated across different cultures. And then there are all those stories about whirlpools.
Like the whirlpool in Germany.
Right. This terrifying whirlpool that was said to be the work of the devil.
And that ominous Devil's Tower.
Yes, with the black monk who lured ships to their doom. It's a really striking image, isn't it? This dark figure standing against the backdrop of the sea, beckoning ships towards their destruction. It really captures that sense of the sea as a dangerous, unpredictable realm, a place where unseen forces could easily overwhelm you.
Absolutely. So we've got fire demons, winter demons, air, and water demons.
Yeah.
But what about animals?
Animals. They certainly play a role in demonology. The idea that animals could be possessed by demons is pretty widespread.
Like that story in the New Testament.
Yes, the devils entering the swine and driving them into the sea.
It's a really vivid image, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not just pigs. The book mentions how Scottish milkmaids would use rowan switches to drive demons out of their cows.
Really? Rowan switches. Why Rowan?
Well, they believed that rowan had protective properties, that it could ward off evil spirits.
Makes sense. And in India, they believed the devils could cause accidents by spooking horses.
That's right. And they would often try to appease Ganesa, the remover of obstacles, before setting out on a journey. It's another example of how people were trying to mitigate the perceived threat from these unseen forces. And the terracotta horses that they found,
What about them?
they were offerings.
To protect the horses.
Exactly, to protect them from evil spirits.
And then there are cats.
Cats. They have such a complex and often contradictory role in folklore. In some traditions, they're seen as protectors, but in others, they're associated with witchcraft and evil spirits.
Like that belief that if a cat jumps over a corpse, it will become a vampire.
Yes, that's a creepy one.
But then there's the Russian folklore, where cats are actually guardians of paradise.
It's amazing how different cultures can view the same animal in such different ways. And dogs, too. They have a similar duality in their associations.
And wolves.
Wolves are really fascinating. They're often portrayed as demonic figures, like Fenris in Norse mythology, the wolf who's destined to devour Odin.
And there are all those medieval stories about wolves devouring heretics.
Exactly. It's like they're seen as agents of divine punishment. But wolves can also be seen as positive figures, like in the Nez Perce origin myth, where a wolf is the ancestor of humanity.
Or the Roman myth of Romulus and Remus, who were raised by a she-wolf.
Absolutely. So animals really hold a complex and often ambiguous place in our understanding of good and evil. They can be seen as both demonic and divine, as threats and as protectors, and that ambiguity probably stems from our own complex relationship with the natural world.
So we've talked about elemental demons, we've talked about animal demons. Now let's move on to a different category of beings. Giants and dwarfs.
Ah, yes. Those figures who lurk in the shadows of folklore, often associated with the untamed wilderness.
And Demonology and Devil-Lore really delves into their connections to the demonic.
It does. They talk about how giants are often associated with wild, untamed landscapes, particularly mountains. They're seen as embodying the raw, untamed power of nature.
It's like those places where humans don't quite belong.
Exactly. And there are all those stories about ancient battles between giants and humans.
Or giants, as the original inhabitants of the land.
Right, like those Northumbrian and Scottish tales about ancient struggles between large and small races, which then became reflected in the legends of giants and dwarfs.
And then there's that crazy story about Diocletian's daughters.
Oh, yes. The myth that their demonic offspring were the original inhabitants of Britain. It's like these stories are trying to explain the origins of different people, different cultures, by linking them to these mythical figures.
And the sheer size of giants must have been terrifying to imagine.
Absolutely. And you see that fear reflected in prophecies like those found in Ezekiel and the Quran, with those apocalyptic figures of Gog and Magog, often depicted as these massive barbarian hordes descending upon civilization. It's like the ultimate threat from the outside, from the unknown. And giants also feature in a lot of local folklore.
They do, like Jordan the Giant.
Yes, who supposedly threaten travelers.
Oh, the giants of the Albach region.
Who are known for their mischievous and sometimes malevolent pranks.
And Orko.
Ah, yes. The terrifying mountain ghosts who supposedly hurled people off cliffs.
It's interesting how these once mighty figures, these embodiments of raw power, they often become figures of obstruction and menace in these more localized narratives.
Right. It's like their power has been diminished, but their threat remains. And that strong association with mountains, it probably also links them to earlier beliefs about mountain demons and the demonization of pagan sacred sites by the newly dominant religions. It's as if the old guardians of these wild places, these figures of power, they were reinterpreted as malevolent obstacles to the new order.
So the giants are demoted in a sense.
Demoted but not forgotten. They still lurk in the shadows of our collective imagination. And speaking of figures who lurk in the shadows, let's turn our attention to one of the most potent and enduring symbols of evil, the serpent.
The serpent. It's a figure that appears again and again in demonology, across cultures, across time periods.
Absolutely. And Demonology and Devil-Lore really dives into the serpent's multifaceted role in our understanding of evil. It's a figure that embodies chaos, temptation, deception.
Like the Vedagahi.
The throttler. He personifies drought, which was a major threat to survival in ancient India. It's a great example of how the serpent was often associated with natural forces that could bring destruction and death. And then there's the Egyptian serpent Naka.
And Typhon.
Yes, Typhon, the monstrous embodiment of chaos and disorder.
They represent everything that threatens the established order, the cosmic harmony.
Exactly. And then you've got the Greek myth of Apollo slaying the python. It's another classic example of this recurring theme of the serpent as a force of chaos that must be overcome.
And then, of course, there's the serpent in the Garden of Eden.
Ah, yes. The tempter, the bringer of knowledge and sin.
And then you have the more ambivalent serpent imagery in the Bible.
Right. Like Moses and Aaron using their staffs to turn them into serpents. It's a demonstration of God's power.
And Paul being bitten by a viper but surviving unharmed. It's like the serpent is both a threat and a symbol of divine power.
Absolutely. It can be a tool of God, but it can also be a tool of evil. And that duality is part of what makes the serpent such a powerful and enduring symbol.
And then there are dragons.
Ah, yes. Dragons. Those magnificent, terrifying creatures who often embody the very essence of the demonic serpent.
And they're often guardians of treasure.
Right. They hoard gold, jewels, sometimes even magical artifacts.
Or in some myths, they hoard the rain.
Exactly. And the conflict often arises when these dragons refuse to share their treasure. They withhold vital resources, threatening the well-being of humans. It's a classic battle between greed and generosity.
And Demonology and Devil-Lore gives us a ton of examples of dragon myths from different cultures.
It does, like the British King Morvidus, who was swallowed whole by a dragon.
And Beowulf, who fought and killed a dragon, but was mortally wounded in the process.
It's like even heroes can't always escape the dragon's wrath.
And I love that image of the fiery serpent appearing in a Welsh sunset.
Yes. It's such a beautiful image, isn't it? But it also speaks to that lingering sense of the serpent's presence in the natural world.
It's like those ancient beliefs are still there, just beneath the surface.
Absolutely. And then there are those medieval descriptions of dragons from travelers like Sir John Mandeville. These elaborate, fantastical descriptions that capture both the awe and the terror these creatures inspired.
It's like they were trying to make sense of something that was both real and unreal, something that existed on the edge of their understanding.
Exactly. And the book also draws a really interesting connection between dragon slaying and the broader themes of colonization and community building.
What do you mean?
Well, they talk about the colonial dragon. It's a symbol of the obstacles that people face when they're trying to establish themselves in a new territory.
Like the wilderness itself.
Exactly. Or the native inhabitants of the land.
And the communal dragon.
That's the threat that unites a community, that forces them to work together to overcome it. It's like the dragon becomes a symbol of any major challenge that a group of people must face.
So it's a really adaptable symbol.
Absolutely. It can represent anything that threatens the established order, anything that needs to be conquered. So we've got these hunger demons, these elemental demons, these animal demons, these giants and serpents and dragons. But the book also talks about how many of these specific, formidable demons eventually declined in prominence.
Why do you think that is?
Well, the text suggests that as humanity progressed, as we developed new technologies and a better understanding of the world around us, the power of these demons diminished.
It's like, as we gain more control over our environment, we no longer needed those supernatural explanations.
Exactly. We learned to control fire. We developed agriculture to lessen the threat of famine. We built better shelters to protect ourselves from the elements. And as those threats became less immediate, the demons who embodied them lost some of their power.
And Hein's gods in exile.
That's a really beautiful and poignant work. It's an allegory for the decline of the ancient gods, their demotion from powerful deities to figures of folklore.
It's like they've been pushed to the margins, but they haven't completely disappeared.
Exactly. They're still there, lurking in the shadows of our collective imagination. And then there's the Saurian theory of dragons.
What's that?
It's a theory that suggests that some early dragon myths may have originated from encounters with real creatures, like crocodiles or giant serpents.
So, like, people saw these large, terrifying reptiles and they thought, dragon.
Exactly. It's a way of grounding those myths in a more concrete reality.
It's interesting to think about how our perceptions of these creatures might have been shaped by our actual experiences.
Absolutely. And then there's Emerson's reflection on the viper. He talks about how nature is seemingly cruelly impartial in its design for destruction. And that leads to a sense of a more generalized, malevolent force rather than a collection of specific demons.
So instead of blaming it on a specific demon, we're acknowledging that there's something inherently destructive in nature itself.
Exactly. It's a more abstract understanding of evil.
And the text ends on a really powerful note, talking about the symbolic defeat of the great dragon of oppression in the context of American slavery.